President Obama stepping into the medical and moral debate over stem cell research. This hour, the president signs an executive order reversing Bush administration policy that limited the use of federal dollars. Supporters say the research could lead to cures for everything from diabetes to Parkinson's to paralysis. Critics object to destroying human embryos. We are covering the politics, the science, and the ethical debates, starting with White House correspondent Suzanne Malveaux and senior medical correspondent Elizabeth Cohen. We will hear from them live in just a moment, but first, Suzanne's report detailing the president's decision.
The executive order today, the fulfillment of a controversial campaign promise.
If we are going to discard those embryos, and we know that there's potential research that could lead to curing debilitating diseases, Alzheimer's, Lou Gehrig's disease, if that possibility presents itself, then I think that we should, in a careful way, go ahead and pursue that research.
President Obama's order will direct the National Institutes of Health to develop revised guidelines on federal funding for embryonic stem cell research within 120 days. It will allow scientists to apply for government grants to support any stem cell research. Under President Bush, taxpayer money for embryonic stem cell research was limited to be used for just a small number of stem cell lines that had already been created from destroyed embryos.
Without crossing a fundamental moral line, by providing taxpayer funding that would sanction or encourage further destruction of human embryos that have at least the potential for life.
Obama administration officials say this is a broader effort to end the Bush administration's practice of putting ideology over science. Critics who oppose the research argue that federal funding could lead down a slippery moral slope.
Federal funding of embryonic stem cell research can bring on embryo harvesting, perhaps even human cloning that occurs. We don't want that. That shouldn't be done. That's wrong.
Supporters say the new policy opens the door for research that may lead to cures for diabetes, Parkinson's disease, and spinal cord injuries.
My religion teaches me to heal the sick. And God gave us this intelligence to find cures for the sick. I think it's a great moment.
Critics argue it is immoral to use stem cells from human embryos because it requires destroying them. They say stem cells taken from adult bone marrow, the skin, or placenta can also potentially create cells that will lead to curing disease. The issue crosses party lines, with notable Republicans Nancy Reagan, John McCain, and Arlen Specter in support of Obama's plan.
Suzanne joins us live now from the White House. Suzanne, great to see you. You know, I heard this question a lot over the weekend. Why is the president doing this now?
Well, certainly this is one of his priorities for the campaign. Obviously, he's dealing with the economic crisis. But one of the things that this executive order does is that it really does put this in motion rather quickly. In about 4 months or so, you'll have these new guidelines that'll be in place. Obviously, members of Congress, they can go ahead and enact legislation, go forward and make this and codify this into law. But it was something that the president really wanted to put his stamp on. And part of that, too, is to take a stand here because they believe the last 8 years of the Bush administration was really about putting politics and policy above science. So they want to take a very strong stand on that as well, Tony.
Well, you're alluding to something that we'll talk about a little later in the hour, Suzanne. The president is also signing this memorandum that really makes the president's case for separating science from politics. So let's talk about that maybe the half hour. Suzanne Malveaux at the White House for us. Suzanne, appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure.
You know, in order to understand the stem cell debate, we need to understand the science, what the cells are, where they come from, and their potential for curing disease. Senior medical correspondent Elizabeth Cohen is here to help us dig a little deeper on that. And Elizabeth, let's start with this question. What makes stem cells so special, so coveted for scientists?
Well, stem cells have really an unusual characteristic. They come from embryos, as you might guess, embryonic stem cells, and they're blank cells. They're cells that have the potential to be any kind of cell in the human body, but they need to be programmed. So, Tony, let me give you sort of the hope.
Great.
You take a cell from inside an embryo, and you program it to become, let's say, a heart muscle cell. Then when someone has a heart attack, what you can do is you could theoretically use those cells to fix the damaged heart muscle. That is one of the hopes for stem cells. It hasn't happened yet, that's one of the hopes.
Well, I'm going to ask you a tricky one here, but you can do it. You're up to the task. Why is this such a contentious debate?
The reason why, simply put, you got to destroy an embryo in order to make embryonic stem cells. Now, some people have no problem with that. Other people say it's murder. These are embryos that are sitting in fertility clinics. Couples make them in order to get pregnant. Now, they often have embryos that they don't use, and they are sitting there on dry ice. Some people say, well, hey, if they're just going to sit there on dry ice, why not use them towards getting scientific advances? Other people say those are human beings, and we should not be killing human beings. It all depends on how you view those embryos. And you know what, Tony? You can't even argue this. If you think it's a human being, you think it's a human being. If you don't, you don't.
Hey, Elizabeth, is there any kind of animal testing going on right now? I'm just sort of curious as to what kind of results scientists are getting from these cells.
Yes, embryonic stem cells have been used in animals. For example, embryonic stem cells have been used on rodents that have been paralyzed. And so you can see this little guy here is having a hard time walking.
Yeah.
And what they did was they then gave him embryonic stem cells, and he was then able to walk better. So they have had, there you go, there you see the after shot. So they have used these with some success in animals. They are just now starting to use them on human beings. There is the first known clinical trial starting up in this country, Tony, where they're going to use embryonic stem cells on folks who have been had spinal cord injuries. And they don't know yet. They don't know if it's going to work or not.
Okay, Elizabeth, if you would, stand by. I've got another question for you in just a moment. You know, actor Michael J. Fox has been an outspoken proponent of stem cell research. Fox suffers from Parkinson's disease. He says he understands the concerns raised by the research, but urges opponents to consider the other side, too.
People that are against stem cell research, embryonic or otherwise, whatever, I couldn't respect them more. If they've prayed on it and they've thought about it and they can't get their head around it or their heart around it, then great. I mean, fantastic. I admire them and I respect them. All I say to them respectfully is, if there's a majority that also prayerfully and thoughtfully and emotionally and intellectually and in every other way weighed this and came on the other side and said, no, I think it's the right thing to do, to very carefully tread these waters to save these lives, then you have to respect that too.
Christopher Reeve was a proponent of stem cell research as well. The late actor was paralyzed in a horse jumping accident 14 years ago. After that, Reeve and his wife started a foundation funding research into spinal cord injuries. He died in 2004. Here's part of what he told Congress in April 2000.
Why has the use of discarded embryos for research suddenly become such an issue? Is it more ethical for women to donate unused embryos that will never become human beings, or to let them be tossed away as so much garbage, when they could help save thousands of lives? Now, treatment with stem cells has already begun. They've been taken from umbilical cords and to become healthy red blood cells used to cure sickle cell anemia. Stem cell therapy is also being used against certain types of cancer. But those are cells that have significantly differentiated. That is, they're no longer pluripotent or capable of transforming into other cell types. For the true biological miracles that researchers have only begun to foresee, medical science must turn to undifferentiated stem cells. We need to clear the path for them as quickly as possible.
The late actor Christopher Reeve and our senior medical correspondent Elizabeth Cohen is back with us. And Elizabeth, we know this research is proceeding on several tracks. We've talked about embryonic stem cell research. Adult stem cell research is going on as well, isn't it?
That's right. Adult stem cells are very different from embryonic stem cells. Adult stem cells come from things like our skin or come from the umbilical cords of newborn babies. Now, these cells are not controversial. No one has any problem with taking a little bit of cells from your skin and trying to turn them into stem cells. But here's the concern. A lot of researchers say that we should be doing both kinds of research, that adult stem cells might be useful for some things and embryonic stem cells might be useful for others. Many researchers say, why would you want to reject either one of those. However, again, people who feel that destroying an embryo is the same thing as murder, they think that we should just stick with adult stem cell research and not do embryonic stem cell research at all.
We've got a wonderful segment planned on this topic a little later this hour, and Elizabeth, you'll be helping us with that, so stay with us. We're expecting the president's, Elizabeth, thank you. We're expecting the president's announcement